What's up, Flannelverse? What's up, Endgamers? We are here starting the Week 12 weekend with the Thursday Night Football game. We've got the Steelers at the Browns. This should be a game. I don't know if I could call it a good game. Probably going to be a gross game. Maybe not, though. Could be fun. Who knows? These quarterbacks have been kind of taking their teams to a higher level offensively, so it could be a fun one. A little bit of gross weather here. We'll talk about it. We'll go position by position: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. We're not going to do the questions segment at the end. You can ask questions throughout the show, though. I'm here with Adam, ShipMyMoney, Scherer. Adam, how you doing today?
Doing pretty well. I was doing better before I ran lineups for this show and saw how much Najee Harris is currently in lineups, but doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, kind of a gross game. I don't know for sure. Actually, we had, I think the screen now, when I move to a new screen, you can't see it anymore. There's a new addition to Lineup HQ where it actually shows Kevin Roth's weather analysis within Lineup HQ. So I pulled it up right here so we can talk about it. Here's what Roth says: rain and snow is extremely likely, potentially all game long. The silver lining here is that the wind stays somewhat manageable, sustained 10 to 15 mile per hour. Gusts around or a bit over 20 mile per hour. I do view this as a downgrade to passing, not because they can't throw in this weather. There should still be plenty of passing, but because teams may be a bit more run heavy in wet weather than they otherwise would be. So that's Roth's notes on the weather. This has the lowest implied, the lowest total of the entire week. So we're kind of expecting this one to be a defensive battle. That's how I'm largely planning to build. Obviously, I'm always going to be doing a mix of different types of builds, different types of like constructions, but I think like the players that I end up being heavier on will sort of kind of imply that I'm expecting it to be a low scoring game. But we can talk about that as we go through the players here. While you're coming in, please do like the video, whichever platform you're on, whichever one of our channels you're on. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. We both are trying to grow new channels. Mine's been around, I don't know, 8 months now, and Adam's has been around a few months shorter than mine. So we're very new this year. We're both trying to grow our channels. So if you would subscribe to the Flannelverse and Endgame Syndicate, we would very much appreciate it. That is probably the best way to support, at least the best way to support me at this point, Adam. You actually have ways that people can give you money with your Substack and Endgame Syndicate. And you've been doing a lot of NBA content. How's that going?
Going well. I'm enjoying it. Again, still need to get more consistent with it. Like, didn't do an NBA show yesterday because I just didn't get projections done in time to do it because there were 800 questionable tags. But yeah, doing an NBA DraftKings tournament show most days during the week around 4:30, 4:45 p.m. on the Endgame Syndicate channel. So I have enjoyed that so far. That's a show that I like doing. And then obviously the Endgame Syndicate site is great. Highly recommend that if you're looking to get better at DFS. Utical, Nerdy Tenor, Brick 75, and myself. Instructional videos, training videos, strategy videos, monthly roundtables answering your questions, stuff like that to help you get better.
Yeah, some of the sharpest minds in the game at Endgame Syndicate would highly recommend it. My real name is not Cornelius, to answer Jake DeWitt's question. I actually, before I start, I do want to shout out just a couple of my promos. And you can find any links in the description of this video, but you can use promo code Flannelverse at Fantasy Points for any product. And most of what we look at today is going to be Fantasy Points. You can get 50% off using promo code Flannelverse. Fantastic deal for fantastic products and content at Fantasy Points. What you're seeing on the screen right now, though, is Roto Grinders. This is Lineup HQ, the Roto Grinders Optimizer. You can get $10 off the NFL package, and the link is in the description for that. But then the other one I just learned today, or yesterday, I guess, 4 for 4 is $24 for the DFS package for the rest of the season. And that's where I'm doing the same analysis that I'm doing on the Showdown shows. I'm doing them for the main slate every week at 4 for 4. So if you want to read just kind of the general, like quick hits on defensive matchups, usage stuff, I do put all that up behind the paywall at 4 for 4. And you can get that, again, $24 for the rest of the year. I don't know if the link in my description actually still gives a discount at all off that $24, but try it out if you haven't already done so. Okay, enough of the promo talk. Let's get into this game, Adam. We have two quarterbacks who have been, only the quarterbacks for their teams for a very short period of time, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. As you can see here, Jameis Winston projecting a little bit better. Interesting fantasy points, gives a very, very small projection to Justin Fields here. Neither of these quarterbacks has a great projection, Adam. I'm guessing that the ownership will sort of reflect that. But let's see. At captain, we've got Russell Wilson coming in at 12% ownership. So that's actually a pretty strong number. Jameis Winston coming in at 8% ownership at captain. At flex, we have Russell Wilson coming in at 45%. Jameis Wilson coming in right around the same, 44.5%. That immediately strikes me as interesting, that Russell Wilson getting more ownership by kind of a significant, at least a captain by a significant margin than Jameis Winston, and he's more expensive. I don't know. How do you feel about these ownership numbers, Adam? What kind of ownership are you getting on the quarterbacks?
Yeah, so I think the ownership is probably going to come in a little bit closer between the two of them at captain. At least that's how I have it projected right now. But I still do think Wilson's going a little bit overowned at captain. I actually think Winston is going a little bit underowned. If the slate started right now, he would actually be my second highest owned captain. I have him showing up optimal about 10% of the time, only projected for about 8% ownership. My concern on Wilson here is it's basically what was mentioned in that blurb from Roth. Nothing to not the specific weather, but I am concerned that the teams here in general just go with more run heavy approaches, but specifically Mike Tomlin. It's just so easy to see a Mike Tomlin coach team that hasn't been great offensively anyway, and does have a great defense that they can lean on, just really kind of going conservative here and going with a run heavy approach in bad weather. It fits, Mike Tomlin in general, like how I think of him as a coach. And so I do have concerns there, not that Wilson can't have a big game. Obviously he can, but I do think I'm a little bit more concerned about the pass run tendencies of Pittsburgh in this game compared to Cleveland. And Jameis is also a little bit cheaper, getting a little bit less ownership. And for me, coming up optimal a little bit higher percentage of the time. So I do think he's going under-owned. I do like him as a captain quite a bit. I am not getting too much, if any, Wilson at captain right now. I think he's going a little bit over-owned. And then also it just has to do with, like I said, I'm getting a ton of Najee right now, which that may change for me at least a little bit between now and lock. I do have a very high projection on him right now that I need to dig into a little bit. But also everything I was just saying about concerns about a Tomlin coach team in this weather, or not even concerns, just concerns specific to the passing game, would obviously bump up Harris as well. So I am getting a lot of Jameis right now at captain, not much Wilson. At flex, I think I'm more spread out there. Still getting more Jameis than Wilson, but I am at least getting to Wilson a decent amount at flex, like 37% of the time. Have him projected for like 45% ownership. So still below the field. Still think he's going over-owned there, but I'm at least playing him there somewhat.
Awesome. So we are very much on the same page. I think in everything you just said, like to me, Jameis looks like the more interesting captain option than Wilson, coming in at lower ownership. He's thrown it at least, I think, 41 times in each of his 3 starts, and like over 45 times in 2 of the 3. He just I don't know. He just wants to throw it a million times. They've been letting him throw it. They've actually been a pretty pass heavy team throughout the year. So yeah, I think that they're definitely more likely to continue to air it out. I think there's a good chance that both teams kind of like stick to the run game a little bit more than usual. So like I did some pick 6 lines where I just kind of correlated a lot of stuff, and I thought like maybe they both just go really run heavy. So I took some unders on pass attempts for both. But I think it's very much more like, I think it's more likely that the Browns throw it quite a bit more than they should, frankly. And Winston coming in at lower ownership. But in general, I do think that I'm going to be light on Russell Wilson relative to ownership. Probably in the flex, I might come in a little bit light on Winston. I'm not sure about that. It's still, it's not that high of ownership for Winston in the flex, I guess. So probably right around the field there. But yeah, very much on the same page as you.
One thing I will mention with the quarterbacks here, if you want to think about this game in a different way than you and I are getting to right now, I had earlier in the week gotten some prop bets down on this game, and I had the over passing yards for both Wilson and Jameis, and I hadn't looked at anything since then. And then I started seeing the weather reports today, and I was like, oh man, I might be getting killed on these props. And so I looked, and like both of their lines have still moved 10 plus yards up as far as passing yards. So like there is definitely a relatively strong possibility that the field is going to overcompensate for weather here. You're not seeing like the prop market crash or anything like that. You're still seeing those numbers move up from where they were earlier in the week. So I do think that paying attention to ownership here is going to be big. I don't think that you or I have some groundbreaking idea that teams might run more in shitty weather. So
right.
There is the potential that the ownership on the running backs here gets steamed, and as a result, the ownership on the quarterback surely plummets.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like this could end up being like everybody wants to play it the way we're expecting, and they're going to be heavy on the defenses, heavy on the running backs, and just not play as much of the passing game is certainly something that the field does do sometimes in this type of game. So we'll have to pay attention to ownership closer to lock. The other thing, correlation wise, both of these quarterbacks I would always stack. I would always have multiple pass catchers in the flex if I have the quarterback in the captain spot. I'll note as far as schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed goes, and again, that's free at fantasypoints.com if you are interested in checking out the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed chart. But the Steelers defense has allowed the fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks so far this year. The Browns defense has been right middle of the pack. They've allowed the 17th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So it is a better spot for Russell Wilson than it is for Jameis Winston based on that metric. I think that is probably accurate. I wrote up today that like I think I'm going to end up. Well, we'll get into defenses later, but I think that the Browns defense is going to come to play today. so that's part of the way I'm approaching this slate is making the assumption that Russell Wilson might struggle a little bit, just because I think that people have been sort of questioning the motivations of the Browns defense recently as the team is completely out of contention. I don't know if there's anything, if that's a worthwhile like thing to consider that, they're not really motivated because you're going to get hurt if you're not playing 100% in the NFL. So I'm not sure that teams really take it easy ever, but they're certainly going to get up for a divisional game in Cleveland regardless. So I think they're going to show up. Anyway, let's what are you getting to in the flex when you have quarterbacks in the captain spot?
Wait, what?
When you have Jameis Winston in the captain spot, are you getting to a lot of Cleveland pass catchers in the flex? And then same question for Russell Wilson.
Oh, yeah. So I was just kind of what you were talking. I was scrolling through my Jameis captain lineups, and they're not always double stacked. Like I do have some, just Jameis plus Njoku, Jameis plus Moore, Jameis plus Tillman, whatever. Also, some Jameis plus a running back plus a pass catcher, but plenty of double stacks in there too. Like you said, not a ton of rushing upside for either of these quarterbacks. As far as how often they're showing up, guys showing up optimal in the flex. When Winston is the captain, Njoku has the highest optimal percentage in flex, 71% for me, followed by Najee at 52. Then it's Moore and Judy, both around 45. Cedric Tillman right behind them at 39. And then everything drops off and gets a little bit flatter. I think it is interesting, actually, now that I'm just looking at that. The Steelers defense is still like the sixth highest flex play with Jameis at captain. So I think it does just kind of speak to how there are ways this game plays out that are just kind of weird. The game could get ugly. Obviously, it's a good defense too. So like you have game outcomes on the table where it's just a relatively low scoring game. Jameis ends up being the optimal captain, but the Steelers defense gets sacks, gets a couple interceptions. It's not like it would be the first time that Jameis throws a few touchdowns and a few interceptions in the same game, kind of his thing. So that was something that stands out that I think is kind of interesting. For Russ, like I said, in the lineups I'm playing right now, at least, I'm not getting a lot of him at captain. But in the lineups where he is the optimal captain, not surprisingly, George Pickens at the top, 51%. Najee and Jalen Warren both in their 44%. So is David Njoku. Then there's a little bit of a drop off to like Jameis, Freiermuth, Tillman, and then a bigger drop off to pretty much everybody else.
Interesting. I was going to say, as far as Jameis, that's another thing that I'm like, you said it's not groundbreaking that this could be like a defensive battle in, bad weather. Like people will probably account for that. I also kind of wonder to what extent, like, does the field just know at this point that Jameis has that within his range of outcomes, that he does throw multiple touchdowns and multiple interceptions? I'm not sure how much the field is going to, because, I love doing the like quarterback with opposing defense, sort of anti-correlation thing that people don't like to do in some cases. I'm not sure if the field is going to shy away from it in this case, and that's one of the things that's hard to predict ahead of time, but I sort of feel like the field kind of knows that that's who Jameis is. So maybe they'll be a little bit more inclined to do it. But yeah, his best season, Jameis threw 30 interceptions, led the league by quite a bit there. What do you think?
Yeah, and also, I mean, the Steelers defense just projects as one of the best point per dollar plays. So anybody not actively setting rules in their optimizer or sim or whatever they're using is going to get Jameis plus Steelers even if you are using a sim and accounting for correlation, they still show up. Like I was just saying, if you're using an optimizer, that doesn't know what correlation is and you're not setting rules, you're going to get a lot of Jameis plus Steelers defense just because it's using projections and nothing else. So I don't think that's going to be a way to get unique. One thing actually that I was just kind of thinking as I look through my lineups is that it looks like a slate where I'm going to have trouble being different, I think, at least with the lineups I have right now. But I just don't really know that I have super creative ways around it either that don't just give me kind of shitty lineups. So right now, at least it kind of looks like one of those slates where might be hoping to make like 10K instead of 30K.
just not aiming for like 5 dupes. You're just aiming to get 20 dupes or whatever.
Yeah, it just like in the lineups I ran, my projected dupes, sim dupes weren't super high. But looking at the lineups themselves and like the ownership and salary and players, I just kind of think that I might be undershooting it. So I won't be surprised if I have just kind of more dupes tonight than usual, at least the way things look for me right now.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to running backs. I do want to hit on Power says, hey, Adam, there was a show where you asked if a comment showed up on the other side. I think that so Adam's question was related to when we post in StreamYard, the streaming software that we use, does it show up on both streams because we're streaming to both of our channels or one? I think that mine show up on my stream and Adam show up on his stream, but we know that like other people's comments don't show up. Like people in the Flannelverse don't show up in the Endgame Syndicate. That part I know, but I'm not positive about how how our comments, where they show up. So I'll post something in here right now. And I'll just ask, is this in the Flannelverse? And you guys can let me know if I'm posting to the Flannelverse or if it is Endgame Syndicate. I'm pretty sure Adam's last comment went to Endgame Syndicate. Mine go to Flannelverse, but don't know that for sure.
Just useful to know so that if I decide to type jokes about Neil while he's talking, I want to make sure that everybody's seeing them and not just half of people.
Because you don't even have the power like I do to pull up the comments on the screen. So if people make fun of you, I'm just going to pull them right up onto the stream so everybody can see them. But if you make fun of me,
I don't think I've ever been made fun of on a YouTube show. Like usually, I mean, the shows are always like me and you or me and Eric or me and Josh. And I am not going to be the one that people make fun of out of those three.
We'll see. All right. Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted. All right. Running backs.
Putting you in good company there.
Yeah. Thanks. Najee Harris. Man, by a mile. I didn't realize how much he projected. I guess I did kind of. He's showing up everywhere. High projection relative to this slate. I got to say, Adam, writing this slate breakdown was one of the toughest that I have had to do because I usually break it down like X number of players that I call the studs. Like, it's usually like 7 or 8 players who just like there's a gap between their projection and the rest of the players on their teams. And usually there's like defenses, kickers making in between them. Here it's like, depending on where you look at projections, they're kind of all over the place. So it's like, who do you include in this group? It's like really like flat tier of like the highest projected players. As you see here, I have it pulled up. The Roto-Grunners projections here, it's like 14, 14, 13, 13, 11, 11, 10, just like it's like really like slow decline down in projection. So really, really atypical slate in that sense, as far as projections go. This is a great memory. Adam, they think you were drunk as hell with Lofty doing the show. You were drunk as hell with Lofty doing the show a couple years back. That was one of the more entertaining shows that I remember watching.
I think one of my most impressive accomplishments in this industry is just like rattling off NBA teams rotations off the top of my head while borderline like blackout drunk on a show.
And then burping in the middle of it.
Yeah.
That was the best part. All right. Running backs. Najee Harris projecting for only around 14 points here at Roto-Grunners, 15 points at fantasy points, 35% flex ownership. That feels low to me. And then at captain, we have Najee coming in at 14% ownership. What kind of ownership? What are you projecting for Najee's ownership, and what are you getting to? What do you see as optimal?
Yeah, so I have a ton of ownership coming into Najee, like 45% at flex, 21% at captain. And I actually think he's going under-owned at captain right now. Again, I do want to dig into that projection a little bit because right now I do have him as the highest projected guy on the slate, which I think is reasonable given that you don't have the best skill players in this game necessarily, and you don't have rushing quarterbacks, and you do have bad weather. So I think it's reasonable, but I do want to dig into it a little bit. But right now I have Najee showing up at captain optimally 23% of the time at like 20% projected ownership. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier too, about the way I have it projected right now. I think it's going to be kind of difficult for me to avoid dupes that much, because I think that the highest owned captain is going under owned. So it creates a situation where it's really like kind of walking that line between, okay, I still need to care about raw ownership, but also I think that one of the clearest ways to exploit the field is to play more of this guy that the field's already playing a lot of. That just isn't really conducive to getting low duped lineups, but it is conducive to playing profitable lineups. So that is kind of a tricky spot. But yeah, I think that he's getting going to get a lot of ownership. I haven't projected for a ton of ownership, and I still haven't projected to be under owned, specifically a captain. At flex, I think he's a little bit over owned, not by a huge margin or anything, but it is kind of pushing me to, again, just get more of him at captain as opposed to flex. I have a ton of him at flex also, but I am prioritizing him more so at captain because of that.
What do you say that you have the flex ownership at?
Projected like 45%.
Okay, so you haven't projected higher flex ownership than Rotogranus has him at least. Rotogranus has him at just 35% flex ownership, which I would guess is going to be a little bit low. But yeah, and obviously they update their ownership throughout the day, so maybe that changes. But as of right now, it sounds like the numbers that Rotogranus has 35% in the flex, 14% at captain. Both of those would be low for you. I mean, captain by quite a bit, it sounds like.
Yeah, what they haven't projected for what a captain?
14%.
Yeah, I mean that would be problematic when I run my stuff because, like I said, like I'm getting to 60% of him at captain right now across 150 lineups with a 20% captain ownership projection, and then I'm getting to like 40% at flex, so a little bit below what I have projected for the field at flex. But also, I do have a Najee right now in every lineup, and just heavily prioritizing him at captain.
Dangle Bro says, from what I can tell, Pitt RB hasn't been optimal in Pittsburgh showdowns in the past 2 years. That doesn't really like matter to me, I guess. Like I don't know if that's true. I haven't like gone and looked at the historical data there, but that's just such a small sample size that I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, I'll say I don't know if it's accurate or not. It's not something that, like, if you guaranteed it was accurate, it wouldn't change how I was approaching this slate at all, because you're just going to have better results projecting forward than looking at something that specific in a small sample. If you say a running back hasn't been optimal in a showdown game in the last 3 years, then you would kind of want to dig into like, okay, why, like what's wrong in the way I'm projecting these games that running backs are showing up. But the running back from this specific team that has been in a bunch of different matchups in a limited number of games that happen to be on national TV over the last 2 seasons just isn't going to be as good as projecting this game out.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't think the teams are playing differently in nationally televised games than they play usually. Like I don't think they're like, all right, we gotta air it out now because this is a nationally televised game. So I think that's just kind of a small sample size, fluky kind of thing.
You've also had varying levels of health for both Harris and Warren over those games. You've had much different quarterback play than they're getting right now, as far as just the ability to move the offense. If you have Mason Rudolph or whoever playing quarterback and you can't get inside the 20, it's going to cut down on the touchdown potential for your running backs.
Right. All right. So Najee Harris looks great. Jaylen Warren, pretty interesting to me also. He's only 6,200, obviously projects significantly worse, but also going to get lower ownership. Let's see. In the captain spot, getting 5% ownership. In flex, Jaylen Warren is getting 26.5% ownership. I think those are, I don't know, feel a little bit light to me. I think I'm going to come in overweight to that. I think I'm also just playing a lot of the running backs in this game, but both those numbers feel pretty low to me for Jaylen Warren, just given the price tag. The recent roll has been better there. What are you getting to of Jaylen Warren?
So I think I have a little bit higher ownership projections. I have him at 32% flex and 5% captain. And at those numbers right now, at least, I have him as the most overowned player on the slate in just across the board, basically.
Okay.
Not totally surprising given how high my projection is on Najee. So, those two things obviously go hand in hand, just like the Russell Wilson takes go hand in hand with where you're at on Najee. But I'm still getting to him a little bit, but not quite as much as the field. I have him like 1% in captain right now, have him projected for 5%. At flex, I have him, I need to scroll down, I guess. Yeah, I have him like 13% of my lineups at captain. projected for 30% ownership. So right now, at least, not totally surprising. I'm jamming Najee, and as a result, not getting as much Jalen Warren. Somebody in chat asked how much Najee and Warren together. 13 to 14% of my Najee captain lineups have Jalen Warren. So definitely not something I'm excluding there.
Okay. And that's that captain. Do you have an easy way of looking like when you have Najee in the flex, how much Warren you're getting? Anything like that?
Yeah. So in the lineups that have Najee at flex, Warren is in 10% of them.
Okay. So yeah, you're getting a fair amount of that. I think I'm probably going to get a lot of that pairing. Yeah. So Jalen Warren, just the role has been better over the past few weeks, and obviously projections are going to account for that. So like what you're using is not like missing this, but over the past 4 games, 44 carries for Jalen Warren, so 4 carries per game, 12 targets. So 11 carries per game, 3 targets per game. So like pretty strong usage, not like awesome usage for a $6,200 player, but I also think he's the better pass catching running back. And I sort of wonder if they do, like when they are passing it, if they do like, and we say this in all the bad weather games, like, are they going to be a lot more shorter passes? And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But I think he could benefit from the bad weather, just from a like, he's more dynamic in some ways than Najee Harris. Not that Najee is completely like zero in the passing game, but I don't know. I think Warren could benefit from the bad weather, just from a like, let's get the guy out there who can run it, or we could just like throw it to him pass a little bit better. So I think I like it, but also, yeah, you're the ownership that you're getting does sound, it's not that far off from what Roto guy is projecting. Again, he's projected for 26.5. You're at 32%, so it doesn't make that big of a difference. But he like from a football standpoint, to me, it seems like he could be a good play, but also like the numbers aren't really bearing that out, it sounds like.
Yeah. And here's the issue with that too. Like, and this, obviously you said it, I agree with it. Everybody in the fantasy space says it, Jalen Warren, the receiving back, blah, 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 blah. His route participation is very similar to Najee Harris game to game. His target share is pretty similar to Najee Harris game to game. The Steelers do not see this as like a Justice Hill, Derrick Henry situation where, Jalen Warren is the receiving back and Najee Harris is the running back. Najee Harris had a higher route participation than Jalen Warren last week. And that's something that we've seen throughout the year. Not that he always has a higher route participation, but that it's not unusual for it to be higher. It happens a decent amount. A lot of times they're basically the same. So that's something to keep in mind here too, where, cause like I had kind of the same thought as you, where, if they are going to utilize a lot of short passes, maybe Jalen Warren's on the field more, but they haven't prioritized, we're passing, we're going to get Jalen Warren out there more. It's kind of when Jalen Warren's on the field, Jalen Warren's on the field. And when Najee's on the field, Najee's on the field. So the fact that the Steelers haven't kind of taken that approach of prioritizing him as the pass catching back makes me, again, just kind of lean more toward Harris, where, yeah, maybe they're short passes and they're to Najee Harris and not Jalen Warren.
I mean, that absolutely could be the case. Actually, I pulled this up thinking that it was going to be like the exact. I mean, Warren has the slight lead in terms of over the past 4 weeks. So it's like, as I said, like the role's gotten a little bit better. So slightly better in terms of route participation, has 12 targets to Najee's 9. But like you said, like on the year, Najee's like his target share is not bad. So like you said, they don't necessarily. Like my thought of, they're going to use him more because he's more dynamic. They kind of seem like they think the running backs are pretty similar. Like both can be used as pass catching running backs, can be used as runners. And they definitely prefer Najee as a runner. Like that much is like very clear that they want to give Najee the carries more, 79 carries over the past 4 games to Jalen Warren's 44. So maybe I'm wish casting a little bit with the
one thing too, I'll point out just kind of a random thing from that 4-game sample. 4 games ago, so week 7, Jalen Warren ran routes on 58% of dropbacks compared to 23% for Najee. So that's probably throwing that off a bit too. In the game since, it's 33% Warren, 30 Najee, 39 Warren, 21 Najee, 29 Warren, 37 Najee last week. So it's kind of just gotten back to that more balanced, as opposed to like that 4-game sample just happens to have the game that Jalen Warren by far ran the most routes all season long.
Interesting. Yeah, I did not catch that, but that is a good note on, the sample size that I've chosen here. Maybe is not reflective of the more recent. Like if we do just the past 2 weeks, it looks a little bit closer there.
Although for what it's worth, I might have looked at the wrong. I think Najee actually somehow had more targets than Warren in that game, even though he ran routes like 1/3 of the time.
Interesting. I mean, we'll see that with the tight ends later. That
Never
can
mind, no,
happen.
it was a 10% target share for Warren, 0 for Najee in that game.
Okay. All right, let's see. I want to see if there's any coach speak here. I did not look at any coach speak index for this game yet. I guess
Cardi, good time to mention this, I guess. I didn't watch the clip or anything, but I did catch that Cardi retweeted something either last night or this morning from like, I don't even know when, but just talking about Tomlin preferring Najee in bad weather games too.
Interesting. Okay.
Or
yeah,
I don't know if it was Tomlin specifically saying that or like a Pittsburgh writer talking about it or whatever, but it was some sort of clip or data or something about preferring Najee in these games.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it. Like that seems like a Tomlin thing that he would just be like, all right, Najee, he's our hard nosed. We're going to run it into the ground with Najee Harris. Yeah, I could definitely see that being the case. Good note. Are you getting to any Cordarrelle Patterson?
I don't think so. I didn't notice it. I was just looking 17% route participation last week, 12% the week before. He is not in any of my lineups right now. I mean, I get it. He's 1K. Obviously, he can do things with the ball in his hands. I have a like 2.5 fantasy point projection on him, so it's not nothing. I have like 2% ownership coming in, which I think is just about like where he should be. You know, he's somebody where I think you certainly can use him. He is somebody like going back to the whole dupe conversation too, and this is something that I was talking to you about a little bit during the Dallas game. He's the kind of guy that like he's not popular, and so it's easy to like click him into a lineup and say like, oh, now I'm different. But like all the Cordarrelle Patterson lineups are going to look the same, and you're still going to dupe a lot probably. So that is something to keep in mind with him and guys like that in general.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We do have the he's been, I guess he was back last week. He missed some time in the middle of the year, right? It's let's see.
Yeah, he's been back 2 games.
Okay. Yeah, just he seems like the type that could, and this is maybe just an Arthur Smith thing. We're all kind of still traumatized from Arthur Smith last year, but like early, I believe it was like week 1, we did see like a goal line carry for Cordarrelle Patterson almost immediately. So I guess we still have that worry about Cordarrelle Patterson. And at 1K, if this does end up being a really low scoring game, actually I could pull up. Here, let me pull up the inside the 5 data. So that's advanced rushing. See if I'm remembering this correctly, or if I just had a nightmare about it. I spelled that wrong. Okay. On the season, inside the 5, where are we? Nope, 0% inside the 5. So it was just a nightmare that I had of Cordarrelle Patterson getting a carry at the goal line. So maybe that's not a real concern, that he will vulture a goal line carry. But yeah, coming in, projecting here for a 6% ownership. What are you seeing as far as that projected ownership there
for Patterson?
Yeah, Cordarrelle Patterson. Yeah,
like 2%.
Okay, so that would make a difference to me. Like 2%, I might have some interest there. 6%, I mean, like I'll probably throw him in a few because I'm going to be 150 maxing the mini max today, so I'll probably get a few shares of Cordarrelle Patterson for sure. But I don't know if I'd want to get above weight. Probably below if it is 6%. At 2%, I might try to get above that number and just kind of hope for something weird at the goal line. All right, moving to the other side, Nick Chubb has been back for a few games now. Still not projecting that well, still not running that well, and he's 9,000, so just $200 cheaper than Najee Harris. You can see here, and this is one where the projection is all over the place. So RotoGrinder says Najee Harris nearly 14, Nick Chubb all the way down at just over 8 fantasy point projection, 25% projected ownership at flex. At captain, Nick Chubb coming in at 5% ownership. Again, he's been really inefficient this year, coming back from an injury, which was kind of expected. But could get a lot of carries here. I don't know. 25% seems like clearly too much to me, but I think other places have it a little bit lower. What are you projecting the ownership for on Nick Chubb, and how much are you getting to?
Yeah, I have like 23% projected ownership to him at flex, 5% at captain. I think it's a little bit low numbers wise. I do. The issue here is like, I agree. I saw it in chat and you said it too. Like he hasn't been efficient. He hasn't looked good. You have him coming back from injury. Those are all things that it's kind of a question of like, how much are you factoring that into your projection? How much are you relying on historical data? In which case, it thinks Nick Chubb is like an amazing running back from an efficiency standpoint. So I have him with like a just shy of a 10.5 fantasy point projection right now. I do think that's one that maybe comes down a little bit between now and the time we get the lock. With the way I have him projected right now, I have him going a little bit under owned. But that being said, I'm still not getting a lot of him. He's in my lineup like 18% of the time at flex. I don't think I have him at captain. So I'm pretty close to the field, even a little bit below the field, even though he's showing up as going a little bit under owned. So I am actually happy with that. Like, I'd be more concerned about exactly where my projection comes in if I were just like jamming him in right now. But the fact that I'm not makes me at least feel a little bit better about that.
Yeah, like it's interesting. So your stuff is showing that 25% is too low on Nick Chubb, but you're still getting lower than that. I think I would want to be less than, like, if he comes in at 25% ownership, I would definitely want to be less than that on Nick Chubb. Even though like he can get there, like even as an inefficient running back.
Yeah, I have 25% as efficient. I haven't projected lower than that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Power says, what's your take on my theory that there will be less play for Chubb in a bad weather, wet game due to his previous injury? I think that there are a lot of potential reasons that he could see. Like, I think there's a wide range of outcomes for Nick Chubb's potential usage today. I think, like, yeah, there's bad weather. It's also a short week as he recovers from an injury. So they have some of those reasons to not want to play him. I also think, like, he's just been really inefficient. And now Jerome Ford was out, I think, the first couple games that Nick Chubb played. And maybe Jerome Ford, as he gets healthier, maybe and Nick Chubb has just been bad, maybe they do just like give a heavier workload to Jerome Ford. So I do think that there are outs there, but on the other hand, it could just be a game where they want to run it a million times. And like you said, with Najee Harris being like maybe just the running back that they want to run, pound it with in bad weather games, Nick Chubb might be just like the trusted running back for the Browns, and they run him 25 times because they want to run it a lot. So I think there's kind of a wide range of usage outcomes for Nick Chubb. I think that's kind of hard to project. But yeah, I don't know. I think that that's a valid point. With that said, so kind of makes me like Jerome Ford, though. He's 4,400. And I'll pull up take a look at the game log of those two, because I think he's just been back the past two with Nick Chubb. Ford at captain coming in at 1% ownership. At flex, Jerome Ford coming in at 16% ownership. I really like it. I think Jerome Ford to me is going to be kind of a stand as of right now. What are you getting to of Jerome Ford? How do you feel about that, Adam?
I'm even with the field at like 16% right now, but I do think he's somebody that I might end up being higher on for basically the opposites of the reasons that we were just saying about Nick Chubb, where, if you're just going to downgrade Nick Chubb's projection for efficiency, then that doesn't necessarily benefit Ford, obviously. But the combination of everything, that was just mentioned, combined with Jerome Ford's actually been good this year.
Yeah.
And, he was coming back from injury. So we saw like an 8% rushing share 2 weeks ago for Ford in his first game back. And the question was kind of like, okay, is this Nick Chubb's backfield now? Or is this just, it was Ford's first game back? Then last week you saw 25% rushing share for Jerome Ford, which still was clearly behind 55% for Chubb, but it was a step up from the week before. Do we end up just kind of getting back to a split backfield here? And maybe on a short week in bad weather, even, Ford really being involved. So at 4,400 and not a lot of ownership, just all these things potentially working in his favor, the bad weather, the short week, the fact he's better than Nick Chubb probably from a talent standpoint right now, all those things working kind of in his favor at modest ownership. I do think it's somebody that I might end up just bumping a little bit, being a little bit higher on at lock than I am right now. And like I said, I'm already even with the field right now at like 16%. So it wouldn't take much for him to probably start showing up a little bit more for me. I do think he's a really interesting play at this salary. And then also, on the slate, it's not like you have a ton of secondary, like high upside secondary options. Like Calvin Austin at 2K is fine. Freiermuth is fine on a showdown slate. But there's not a lot of guys in this range that you're looking at and saying, oh, I can really see the case other than gets lucky and breaks a huge play for a big game. There's not a lot of like input or projection volatility in this price range for guys other than Jerome Ford that you can look at and say, oh, maybe like Calvin Austin is not going to be the number one receiver ahead of George Pickens ever, right, barring injury. You could make the case again that Ford is just like even with Nick Chubb in this game at a $4,600 salary or $4,600 price difference.
Yeah, no, so we're very much on the same page. Sounds like we're both sort of inclined to IKB this one with Jerome Ford, where it's like, yeah, like the projection doesn't look that amazing. The usage hasn't really been there, but like there are reasons to think that he could have a bigger role than we're projecting for. Could also just like there's also the like we've talked about before. He could there could just be a bigger pie, so he gets more usage just because the running back pie in general is bigger, or it could be he takes a bigger part of that pie, or both. So like there's potential major usage there. I'm also always a fan of the backup running backs on showdown sites. Not always, but like it's usually like okay, pretty reasonable price, kind of reflects their like base scenario, their standalone value, but doesn't always account for the upside value in the case contingent value if something did happen to Nick Chubb or whatever. So yeah, I think Ford looks awesome to me. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. TJ says he almost shipped when he watched on Monday, so figured he better come back. What's up, TJ? Producer at Roto Grinders, some of the shows that I do. What's up, TJ? All right. So we both like Jerome Ford. Any pure strong for you?
I don't think so. I mean, he's $400. So, like, if Chubb were to get hurt or something, Strong is the number 2 running back at that point. But we haven't really seen much. He had a 10% rushing share last week, 8% the week before that, which, if I remember correctly, was like literally 1 carry. Could be wrong, but
2 carries each.
Okay, yeah. Clearly not involved with Chubb back and Ford back. So, if you are going there, it's for the contingent value of, Chubb gets hurt and then Ford's the running back 1 and Strong's the running back 2. So almost think not that like I'm really ever setting hard and fast rules in Showdown because so much random stuff can happen. There is probably like positive correlation between Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong.
Yeah, that probably is true. I also like the reason I didn't say like contingent value in case of a blowout for Jerome Ford is I do think that would be more likely to go to Pierre Strong. Like if there is a blowout in the fourth quarter, it would probably be Pierre Strong getting those carries instead of Jerome Ford, I would guess. But yeah, I think fine play. Probably not somebody who, definitely not somebody that I'm planning to prioritize at least.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting him, you're just hoping for the random something goes wrong,
Yeah.
like having span Ford in the Cowboys game at 0.5% owned.
Right. Yep. The starting tight end gets hurt in the first quarter and suddenly he looks like a slam. All right. I think that's it on running backs. Did you have anything else to say? Actually, I'll read off my notes here, but did you have anything else you want to say about running backs?
Nope. Ready for Najee Harris to bury me.
Yep. I think, I mean, he'll be burying everybody together at the very least.
Yeah, that's really the most frustrating. It's not even that I'm upset that I'm probably going to be playing a lot of Najee Harris. It's that I'm upset that I'm knowingly about to play a lot of Najee Harris when everybody else is about to play a lot of Najee Harris, and I'm just going to end up duping with them and then losing anyway because Najee Harris sucks.
Let me give you a piece of advice, Adam, that an old wise man once said to me: just play whoever you want. You can just play whoever you want, Adam. So you don't have to play Najee Harris just because SaberSim tells you to.
There are not 6 players in this game that I want to play.
That is also true. Very fair. My notes, Browns defense has allowed the 3rd fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs. So another reason to, if you don't want to play the running backs, the Browns defense has been tough on running backs. The Steelers defense, let's go find that, has allowed the 13th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running back. So another, it's more of a middling matchup, but obviously not a great one. Yeah, I think we went over all the other notes on like usage trends potentially could go in Ford's favor, but we don't really know at this point.
One other minor point on Najee to try and make myself feel better. You mentioned, how good Cleveland's been at preventing fantasy points to running backs. They've been above average at preventing fantasy points on the ground, but they've been like extremely good in the air. So
that is true.
Bad, but not as bad matchup for the guy that you're looking to run the ball as opposed to catch it. But yeah, I'm pretty much just trying to comfort myself at this point.
Yeah, I thought about writing out that little difference. You can see it right here. It's negative 3.3. Like they're the 3rd worst overall and through the air, and it's this is sorted by just on the ground. It's still like I don't know 12th worst or something like that. I didn't do the addition there, didn't count it out, but still not a good matchup. But yeah, it is slightly better. That's a good point. All right, let's move on to receivers. Move this down. Okay. And we will start with George Pickens. going to be the highest projected receiver on the slate. We'll work through the Steelers first. Pickens is 11,000, projecting for 14.1 fantasy points at Fantasy Points. At Roto Grinders, projected for 14.5 fantasy points. 36% flex ownership going to Pickens. 14% captain ownership. How do you feel about those numbers, Adam? What are you getting to with George Pickens? And do you have him projected similarly there in terms of ownership?
I have 42% flex, 13% captain ownership projected. I'm not getting as much a captain. I only have 2%. I do think he's going pretty over-owned there, which, again, keep in mind that all of my stuff is, interrelated. So if I think Najee's going under-owned at 20% at captain, I probably think Russ and Pickens are going over-owned at captain. But yeah, I think Pickens is going over-owned at captain. I think he's going over-owned at flex, but by a smaller amount. I'm under the field right now, at least in both, like 2% at captain, 27% at flex. The upside, very, very obvious. He is, expensive, as he should be, but 11K is a pretty healthy price tag, especially just kind of relative to what we've seen this season in Showdown. It's like pricing has been pretty soft across the board, and then they just said screw that and jacked up George Pickens as much as they could. But the upside's obviously there. We know Russ is willing to throw him the ball, which is a really big thing. Like Pickens, not always the best at getting open, but extremely good at catching contested passes, and having a quarterback that will just throw it up to him in coverage is really important for him, and Russ will do that. So clearly the upside's good. The matchup's actually been pretty solid so far this year as well for receivers against Cleveland, despite it being a pretty good defense overall. But again, I'm just not getting to as much as the field, which goes again with how much Najee I'm getting.
That's kind of where, like, especially at the numbers that you have, it sounds like you're projecting him for a little bit higher ownership than Roto Grinders is, at least in the flex. They have 14% at captain. In the flex, they had Pickens coming in at 36%. You have him 44%. So 36% to me seems like kind of reasonable for the wide receiver one. Whereas if you get up to in the 40s, it's, I don't know. Like, I might even be a little bit light on 36%. He seems like a solid play. I'm ready for to hear about the moonball all day. Just the George Pickens, Russell Wilson moonball connection. I'm looking forward to that bearing me, but I think I'm probably going to be a little bit light here. I will say it's not the worst matchup in the world. Browns defense has allowed the 12th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So if you take the weather out of it, if the weather doesn't end up impacting things as much as usual, like certainly, I mean, even with bad weather, the upside is clearly there for George Pickens. You kind of laid out the case there.
Yeah, the matchup's been good. If you look at like the coverage data in fantasy points, it's a slightly positive matchup for Pickens. The biggest concern I would have is that Cleveland's defensive line does have the highest pressure rate over expectation by a wide margin this season, and we know that. So it's really just, can they get pressure on Russ, and will he have enough time for routes to develop downfield for Pickens, because we know that's where he likes to work. But it is a team that I think it's important when you talk about coverage data to keep that in mind, because the looks in the secondary that Cleveland generally gives you are favorable for deep ball outside receivers, but that's because they know they have such a good pass rush that they can afford to do that. And it's just a matter of, does the pass rush get home or not? Pittsburgh's line this year is graded out middle of the pack in pass rush allowed over expectation. So that really will have, I think, a big impact on how Pickens does as well. Is just, does Russ need to dump the ball down? Does he need to get it out quick? Or does the line hold up and he's able to find Pickens down the field in favorable matchups?
Yeah. Power says Pittsburgh has allowed this is going back to running backs, the 9th most targets, 7th most receptions, 8+ yards per reception to running backs. That's a good note from Power on the good spot for Cleveland running backs, which just makes you like Jerome Ford that much better. We laid out the case for Pickens. Outside of Pickens, we have Calvin Austin is just $2,000 coming in the flex at, where are we? Oh, here. 15.5% ownership in the flex to Calvin Austin. At captain, coming in at, I'm just curious if he's getting captain ownership. 1.5% ownership. Seems pretty good to me. Like he's one of the better value plays on the slate, like point per dollar. The number 2 at fantasy points, the number 2 point per dollar play on the slate. So I don't totally hate those numbers for Calvin Austin. How much Calvin Austin are you getting to? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think he looks fine as a value play. He's in like 13% of my lineups in the flex right now. I have him projected for 12% ownership there. So I'm pretty much around the field. He just fits into lineups where I need a 2K guy. Again, just going back to how I think this is kind of going to be a dupe heavy slate. He's clearly one of the better values, but He's getting double-digit ownership. He's still not doing a whole lot to lower your dupes or help you be different. So that, keeps him from getting jammed in the lineups too much for me, I think. But I think he looks like a good value.
Yeah, he looks.
Oh, good. Sorry.
He looks solid to me, not like spectacular. I'd say I think he looks better to me than Kevontae Turpin would have looked at 17% ownership on Monday, if I'm being honest. But not like a huge priority. Seems about right there. What were we going to say?
Yeah, and potentially somebody that they look to get the ball in his hands on shorter routes if they're struggling to pass protect.
Yeah, that is true. Behind Calvin Austin, I mean, it's kind of a mess. Like there's not many like great plays in the Pittsburgh receiving core. You've got actually, let me sort. Oh, I'm sorted by fantasy points. There we are. Van Jefferson projecting for 3 fantasy points. Mike Williams 2.6 fantasy points. Ben Skowronek down there, not much of a projection there. Mike Williams, it's sort of hard to know what to do with Mike Williams because so far on the Steelers, he has just 1 target. And I might remember, I feel like he had a game-winning touchdown or a game-tying touchdown or something like that. So it was his 1 target.
I can't tell if
touchdown.
you are being a dick right now if you're actually asking.
I am actually asking. Do you not know?
He scored the game-winning touchdown against Washington.
Oh, I didn't realize it was against Washington either.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was the case, but then I saw that he only had 1 target, and I was like, that can't be right. Like I thought I remembered he had a game-winning touchdown for the Steelers, but I didn't like go back and look it up. That's funny. So, but he has not played much so far for the Steelers. Actually, I'll just pull it up here. All right. Yeah, 1 target on like, I guess 24 and 29% route participation is not nothing. There was a little bit of coach speak there. I was just looking at the coach speak index for Mike Williams. On the 18th, Mike Tomlin said, "I'm excited about continuing to get to know Mike Williams more and how he might be able to help us and infusing him more into what it is that we do. I like his work. How we feel about his progress is not always reflected in statistics. We'll keep working. He's doing a great job fitting in. I like the trajectory." On whether Tomlin sees Williams getting a higher share of snaps, he said, "We'll see, man. It just really is week to week from a matchup perspective of how we put our plan together." So make of that what you will. Maybe he'll get more snaps. No guarantees there. They're trying to incorporate him more in what they want to do. What are you doing with Mike Williams?
I don't think I'm getting much of him. Like you said, just hasn't been very involved, hasn't been running a lot of routes. Van Jefferson was still well ahead of him in route participation last week. So he's not showing up for me right now. Obviously, he is somebody that he's a big play threat. 3,200 is a price tag where from a median standpoint, he's just not going to look good. But if he catches a 50-yard touchdown, he's going to look really good. But yeah, I mean, the combination of the routes not being there and then this being a tough matchup for his skill set too. Like we were just talking about it with Pickens, but like Mike Williams' job really is just to run go routes and get open deep. And this is not the best matchup to do that against a really, really good pass rush.
Yeah, not a great spot for Mike Williams. 11% ownership seems fair. Like that doesn't stand out to me as a too low number either. So kind of tough, but I'll probably be not far from the field would be my guess on Mike Williams. Peppertoni says, no, Adam is a Washington football fan and not a Ravens fan. Yeah, probably Adam's biggest regret, I would guess, not being a Ravens fan right now.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. But yeah, I mean, I grew up like 15 minutes from where Washington plays. The Orioles are the only Baltimore team I'm a fan of because the Nats didn't exist. But I do go to more Ravens games than Washington games because I live like a mile from the stadium now.
Yeah. We got a question from Steven. Who does Cleveland use in the screen pass the most? Do you have stats for that? I know that I can find that in the data suite. I don't know how to quickly find it in the data suite. So here, actually, I think I could figure it out pretty quickly here. Screen passes split. I think it would be under split. I have not looked this up. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this right now. Maybe I'll try and look it up before my show later, potentially. I've never tried to do this before, so yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna continue spending time right now trying to find that. But that is a good question. All right, outside of my Van Jefferson, are you getting too much Van Jefferson?
I've been projected for like 3% ownership. That's about where I have his optimal rate. He is not showing up in lineups for me right now. Kind of similar to Mike Williams. Like, I think that the medium projection here isn't really great, but obviously he ran like 51% of routes last week. He could have a decent game, but I'm not getting to him at 2,800.
Yeah, I noted in 4 games with Russell Wilson, 11 targets for Van Jefferson. So, nearly 3 targets per game, 65.2% route participation. So, not the worst usage in the world. I feel like that might have been trending downward in terms of the route participation, but let me see if that's true. I might be thinking of somebody else. Yeah, down to just 51% of routes last week. So that was lower than he had been. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe trending in the wrong direction, but I think he's a fine play at like very little ownership. Like I would imagine I come in heavier than 4%, just by nature of like trying to leave salary on the table, trying to get different. But I don't feel particularly strongly about it. It's just kind of he needs to break off a touchdown to get there. So I think he's fine. On the other side, really interesting. I mean, the Browns with Jameis Winston have just been like all of the pass catchers getting great usage, and nobody really separating there. Let's see, which of the games? Let me look up. I'm going to bring up the sample size here because I'm forgetting how many games exactly Jameis has started. So give me 1 second. But you can start going on Cedric Tillman. How much Cedric Tillman are you getting to?
I was looking up the screen data, but I don't know that I did it right because it like one, it looks like Cleveland just like doesn't throw screens, and then 2, David Njoku leads the way with 4 targets on screens, but like Ford and Chubb don't have any, so I don't know, probably didn't filter right or something. But as far as Tillman goes, he's my 3rd highest owned flex guy right now at 42%. I think 7K is a perfectly fine price tag. I don't have him at captain. That is in part just because I have so much Najee at captain, but I think that Tillman looks pretty good. I'm projected for about 33% ownership at flex, 7% at captain. So I am over that market flex, under that market captain. Not, going to be overly concerned that he didn't have a great game last week. Obviously, some of his big games were fluky. You're just going to see it sort of balance out. Clearly very involved in the passing game here, but also clearly not just the, number 1 receiver ahead of Jerry Jeudy every week or anything like that. Route participation still looks good. 88% last week, slight edge to everybody else. Still had a 17% target share, which is his lowest of the last 4 weeks, but it's still pretty close. It basically has ranged from 17 to 23%. So I think he looks perfectly fine here.
Yeah, as the coverage grade, as I'm sure you looked up, looks great for Cedric Tillman. The usage, as I was just alluding to, I'll pull it up here. These are just the 3 games with Jameis Winston. This is how close they are. 29 targets for Jerry Jeudy on 90% route participation. 28 targets for Elijah Moore on 76% route participation. 27 for Tillman on 89.3%. And Njoku not far behind. 23 targets, 77.3%. So just like really strong usage for a 3-game sample size on everybody. Because again, we've had Jameis just throwing it over 40 times per game. Tillman would be my favorite in a vacuum. Let's see, is that also true of the field? He's getting to 34% ownership for the field. What did you have his flex projected ownership at?
Like 32, 33.
Okay, so pretty similar there. Looks pretty good. Man, 10.5% captain ownership feels pretty high on Tillman to me.
I only had 7.
Okay. Yeah.
Projected, and I don't have him at all.
Okay, yeah. So 10.5, I would imagine you certainly wouldn't have him at all either. Yeah, that seems like a pretty high number there. But I think he looks good. Like he's a very solid flex option. I'd say 32% feels about right, I think, on Tillman. Outside of Tillman, we had here. I'll just go back to the projection here. Jerry Jeudy actually projects about the same on fantasy points, the exact same on fantasy points as Tillman. Where does Roto Grinders have it? Jeudy coming in at 34% ownership. The projection, they also have almost identical projections. Coming in at 34% ownership. That's kind of interesting because he's $1,000 more expensive and still getting the same amount of ownership at the same projection. At captain, Jerry Jeudy coming in at 7% ownership. These numbers feel a little bit too high to me. Like I'd rather just get to the less expensive Tillman. So I think I would probably be sacrificing some Judy here. How much Judy are you getting to?
I have like 33% at flex right now. So I had 42% Tillman, 33% Judy. That puts me basically in line with the field at flex on Judy, a little bit over the field at flex on Tillman. I don't have either one at captain though. So it puts me basically even with the field overall on Tillman and then a little bit under total ownership on Judy. But yeah, it's just, the range of outcomes is very, very similar for him and Tillman and really Elijah Moore to some extent also.
Yeah.
We had seen, I had talked about it previously in my notes for last week that we hadn't really seen a big Jerry Jeudy game yet, but the opportunities were obviously going to be there. He was running as many routes as anybody on the team, similarly priced to guys like Tillman, a little bit more expensive than Moore. And then last week, you see the huge Jerry Jeudy blow-up game. Just like with Tillman, you don't want to read too much into the bad game he had. You also don't want to read too much into the game where Tillman got there because he caught a Hail Mary at the end. You don't want to just suddenly massively change your opinion on Jerry Jeudy because of what he did last week, assuming that your opinion was, yeah, Jerry Judy's got some big games coming. If your opinion was Jerry Judy's the wide receiver 3 on this team, then yeah, you should probably change it. But yeah, he looks good. Obviously, pairing him with Jameis is going to look pretty good as well.
Yep. You mentioned that Elijah Moore has kind of a similar range of outcomes, looks pretty similar in terms of usage. He's only 9,600 in the captain spot, getting just 3.5% ownership. So that does sort of interest me, seeing that he's coming in, he's like way less expensive and coming in at way lower ownership, at least on RotoGrinders, 24% ownership in the flex. They actually have him projected 3 fantasy points worse. I guess 2 fantasy points worse on the fantasy point site. He is running fewer routes, but I'm sort of intrigued just based on like even though he's not running quite as many routes, he has actually gotten more targets over the past 3 weeks than Cedric Tillman. I think he looks pretty good. What do you think about Elijah Moore?
Yeah, I think he looks pretty good too. He's getting similar targets to those other guys. You've seen, a pretty flat target distribution between the 3 wide receivers and Njoku, which I think ultimately is good. You can't point to one of them as the clear number 1. There's nobody, like none of them are Cortland Sutton out there just getting 30% of targets at like 6K or whatever. But the targets aren't really going anywhere else. So it kind of gives them a reasonable floor collectively. But also in a 1-game sample, they all have pretty high ceilings because the total target pie for Cleveland is pretty much spread across 4 guys. So, and Elijah Moore being one of them. I have him being optimal at flex 27% of the time at 24% projected ownership. He showed up in my 150 set 27% of the time at flex. Also did not get to him at captain, where I have him projected for 4% ownership. So again, kind of similar to the other receivers on Cleveland, I'm pretty much around the field overall, but a little bit over at flex specifically.
Yep. Coach Chris, I appreciate the comment, and I'll just say we're happy you guys found us on our channel so we can continue doing content for you, because obviously we enjoy doing it. So I'm glad you're enjoying our content and glad that you found us where we are now. Outside of, like you said, it's very condensed to that group of receivers. Do we have any? Kadarius Toney, I guess, could get involved at some point. The rookie Jamari Thrash, both would be just total tournament dart throws, right?
Yeah, I'm not getting either one. And also Thrash is not free, which is interesting. Toney is 200. So, at least with him, you have the outs of they try and get him a touchdown. But, I think we saw the Toney design play last week go for -7 yards, which was reminiscent of every other Toney design play that's happened in his career. So I don't know how long they'll keep going to that one.
Yeah, you could make a case for Toney that that was his first game on the team, so maybe he could see more usage, but I don't know if they have any real reason to want to get Kadarius Toney involved. He's never been very good, but ran 2 routes last week. Yeah, I don't know. He's they're just tournament dart throws. It's kind of all you can say for Toney and Thrash, I think. Any other receivers? Did you get any Ben Skowronek?
I don't think I did. Let me double check. No, I didn't. This slate's weird, at least. My lineups, I should say, are weird, at least. I've kind of been having issues the last couple of weeks of playing too much of the random $200 dart throw guys. And then today I don't have them at all.
Interesting.
I don't know what changed that, but.
Yeah.
Not really upset about it.
Yeah. We got a question. I think it's a good one. Who will Joey Porter be on the most? Looks like he's projected to shadow Jerry Jeudy. So that's another knock on Jerry Jeudy is it appears that Fantasy Points is projecting him to be shadowed by Joey Porter. Although in terms of coverage grade, it looks like a not bad spot for Jerry Jeudy, second best coverage grade of the team, which is sort of interesting to see that they're expecting that he's going to be shadowed, but also it's a strong coverage grade. So make of that what you will.
Well, the coverage grade just has to do with looks, not personnel, like not specific players, right?
Yeah, I believe that is correct. So like that's not going to factor in. So it's like he has a positive coverage grade in terms of the looks he should get, but also he'll be shadowed by Joey Porter Jr. So it's kind of a throw your hands up situation to me, where it's like probably a fine spot, kind of middling. But do you see it differently? I don't know.
No, I don't really care that much about corner matchups either.
Yeah, they're Patrick Surtain. Like there are very few that you really care about. Joey, like he's obviously good, but yeah, I don't think that I care.
Getting cooked in the Washington game for whatever that's worth, which is
oh, was he really?
But
yeah,
at least I didn't see the whole game, but in the parts I saw, I think gave up a deep ball and then committed 2 or 3 pass interferences on other ones.
Okay, good note. All right, move on to tight ends. Or anything else to say about receivers?
Tight ends.
Okay, moving on to tight ends. Oh, and I moved to the wrong page. That's why I'm lost here. All right. We'll start with David Njoku, going to have the best projection of any tight end on this slate. And like we said, it's pretty flat distribution here with Jameis Winston. Let's see. 23 targets for David Njoku, 77.3% route participation. I've been saying I think he's probably the best pass catcher on the team, so kind of expecting an expanded role for David Njoku. I don't think that we have seen that yet. So he's been sort of behind. I guess he did see 9 targets in the last game, so maybe that came up a little bit on 82.4% route participation. I played a ton of David Njoku on the main slate last week. That did not go well, but I still like him. He's 7,600, 28% projected ownership in the flex. At captain, Njoku coming in at 6% ownership. I don't know. I think David Njoku is probably somebody that I'm going to be overweight on again. What do you think? How much you get into of Njoku?
I have like 33, 34%, which is right where I have his ownership projection. I actually have him going over owned right now. Like I have him optimal at flex 30% of the time, optimal at captain 5%, and then projected for 34 and 8% respectively. But even with him being projected to go over owned, he's still showing up in lineups at a rate pretty similar to the field, which, again, just I've mentioned it before, but you're not necessarily just trying to find the most under-owned players and throw them all into a lineup together. He obviously projects well, but also pairs nicely with Jameis Winston, who I'm playing a lot of at captain. So you get a situation where within like my lineup set, I think Jameis is going under-owned at captain. I'm playing him a lot at captain. And then once I'm doing that, I'm obviously going to have Njoku paired with him a lot. So as a lineup, I still have lineups that I think are going under-owned, even though it has Njoku in it.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it looks like a good Njoku spot. Einsteinium says, tell me why this is a Njoku yards after catch game. I mean, that would be sort of a benefit to Njoku. If this is like there's some wind, there's bad weather, maybe they don't want to take deep shots. Maybe they target Njoku a little bit shorter and take advantage of his yards after catch abilities. So I do think that is like, this does set up to me as a good spot for Njoku in some ways, at least. Let's see, in terms of schedule adjusted, I don't think that it was a great matchup. Let's see. Yeah, Steelers defense allowed the 13th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight end. So actually a positive matchup, very slightly, basically a middling matchup for David Njoku. But I think the price is good enough, and I think this skill is there, and the bad weather maybe could benefit him. So I think that I do like Njoku overall.
Steelers haven't been great at covering tight ends split out, and that's like 48-ish% of Njoku's routes.
Good note. Did you say are you getting to Njoku a captain?
No, but right now, like really all I'm getting to a captain right now is Jameis and Najee. So I need those numbers to come down for me to start getting these other guys. And Njoku's definitely somebody that I think is like a viable captain. It's just that I think he's going a little bit over-owned. I think Najee's going under-owned right now, and I think Jameis is going under-owned right now. And most other relevant pieces, I think, are going over-owned at captain. So it's kind of just like jamming those guys in.
I think I did list Njoku on my, I have to list out my 3 favorite captains. He was one of my 3 favorite captains, just coming in a little bit lighter than I think he should be. So I do like Njoku quite a bit at captain. So I imagine that I will be over 6% for what it's worth. Outside of Njoku on Cleveland, we have Jordan Akins has had pretty decent like target share, at least, or not even like raw targets, I guess, because he's just, there have been so many targets going around. Just a 6% target share, but 8 targets in 3 games with Jameis is like solid for a backup tight end. More than 2 per game seems like a better than average backup tight end situation. Would you agree with that on Jordan Akins? Like, looks pretty good at 1,600.
Yeah, I mean, it can very easily disappear because he's not running a lot of routes.
Yeah.
I think it was like 17% last week. Like that can very, very easily go away. But like you said, for a backup tight end, I think it's fine. He is. I think I saw that I was getting to him at least a little bit. Like literally 1 out of 150 lineups right now.
Okay.
At 1,600. But yeah, I mean, the concern there is that they can just completely dry up. But if he gets 2 targets, the other thing is like he's 1,600. And I think maybe this has to do a little bit with why I'm not getting as many of the random backup guys today. Like you have a couple that were $200, Tony and I think Skoranek, if I remember right, was down there. But like Jordan Akins at 1,600 is different than Span Ford at 200 or whatever.
Sure. 8.5% projected ownership to Jordan Akins. That feels like a fine number to me. Like I probably match the field there. But you only have 1 in 150 because you think he's too expensive at 1,600.
I guess I also have his ownership projected lower, but I have him optimal like 2% of the time.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like you are right. Like the trend is sort of in the wrong direction, although it's just could be just a small sample size fluky
There's
thing
also
down
not
to
pay up options that look great today. That's
also true. Good point.
Like
so you don't really need it.
Right. Like the other day, it was Houston, Dallas, where I'm playing a bunch of Lamb and Nico and Stroud. Like
Mixon. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mixon.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. You don't necessarily need it. Yeah. So maybe 8% is not underowned. Better usage than the typical backup tight end, but yeah, like you said, kind of priced, like especially like relative to the pricing on the rest of the slate, doesn't look like a great value there. I assume you're not getting into any Jeff Swaim.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Okay. On the other side, we have Pat Freiermuth is the leading the Steelers in route participation, at least among the tight ends. Darnell Washington also actually out targeting him since Russ took over as the quarterback. We'll start with the Freiermuth side of it, coming in at 15% ownership in the flex. He's only 3,600. He's running a fair amount of routes. What are you doing with Freiermuth?
I'm playing him a little bit. I have like 9 to 10% right now. Hasn't been very involved in the passing game all season long, and that hasn't changed with Russ as far as earning targets. He's also projected for 15% ownership. I have him being optimal about 15% of the time in the flex, and then like 2% at captain, which is about where his ownership is too. So I think he's fine at that salary. It's not like there's been a lot of cheap guys that I like. His route, the routes he runs potentially get a little bit more valuable in a game like this, with bad weather, but also against a pass rush that's really good. If they don't have time to get the ball down the field to Pickens, and Austin has like a 12 ADOT as well. Maybe you're getting a little bit more work for Freiermuth over the middle on shorter routes. But yeah, I think he's just kind of the last guy in.
Yeah, I think that is a fair assessment of Freiermuth. Like you see 15% at 3,600, and my gut instinct with Pat Freiermuth is like that's way too low owned. But then it's like you look at the actual number, and it's like maybe it's not though. Like you said, he's just in. This is what four games with Russell Wilson, just 9 targets, just over 2 targets per game, 65.9% route participation. I think I like it. Like I probably come in slightly over 15%, but I don't feel like super strongly about that being too light for Freiermuth. Darnell Washington, as I mentioned, more targets than Freiermuth since Russell Wilson took over as quarterback. 11 targets in 4 games, so just under 3 targets per game for Darnell Washington. Even though, as you can see, the route participation for Washington just 28.3%. So it's hard to say whether that's like intentional or just a fluky thing in still a pretty small sample size. But we're projecting Darnell Washington for 5.5% flex ownership at 2,400. That feels light to me. how much are you getting to of Darnell Washington?
I only have 3 or 4% right now, but I do think he's going a little bit underowned. He showed up as optimal 7 to 8% of the time for me at like a 5 to 6% ownership projection. He earns targets when he's on the field. It's just a matter of getting on the field. But 34 to 36% route participation in the last couple of weeks isn't nothing. It's not like you're talking about somebody that's out there, barely running any routes. His targets per route run is 5th highest on this team, behind only Pickens, Patterson, Warren, and Harris. So, your 3 running backs that are running not that many targets, or not that many routes as a whole, and then your number 1 wide receiver. So, he has earned targets when he's on the field. He is cheap. He is running a decent number of routes. So I think he looks like one of the higher upside values.
Yeah, and they like it. I don't know. Do you remember the first? I don't know if you watched the game, but like the first game that Russell Wilson played, it felt like they were like there was just a play where like they threw it to him on the sideline like 3 different times. Just like, oh, that play just like works every time. Like, and it seemed like they were designing to get him the ball. And it's kind of stuck, like 3 targets each of the past couple of weeks. I don't know. It's at least an interesting play where it seems like they are trying to get him the ball when he is on the field. I guess we can look at first read targets.
And as like a prospect too, if I remember correctly, he was somebody that, he was like raw, but the kind of scouting report that I remember from watching the draft was kind of like, this guy has the skill set where if everything clicks, he's like a big play guy. So, to see Wilson seemingly looking to use him that way, I think probably does have some value.
Yeah. And he's also, and I've learned that this is true of like every tight end, but he's like a huge dude. Like, I mean, I think he's even bigger than the average. He's like 6'7", 6'8", something like that. Just like should be an end zone target. Any Connor Hayward, I feel like there was a showdown slate. I remember this every time I'm doing a Pittsburgh showdown slate. Was like there was one that I like didn't even bring him up because the route participation wasn't there, and then he had like 3 targets, 2 of them in the end zone. It felt like just like what is going on here with Connor Hayward? I don't know. What is the ownership coming in at 0.6% ownership at 600 for Connor Hayward? How much are you getting there?
0.
Okay, I'm just pulling up the game log here. 2 routes run last week, 1, 2, 5. This must have been against Dallas. I think this was the showdown slate that was super frustrating. 4 targets just out of nowhere after like not being targeted at all. So I guess that's.
Oh yeah, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, so I guess that can happen, but it's pretty unlikely. At 0.6%, I think it's like in a 150 set. If you want to get to a couple shares, I think that makes sense. But
the problem, and it's what I was saying earlier, like the Connor Hayward lineups though are probably going to be duped a lot, even though nobody's playing him. Like
true.
Everybody that does play him is playing him in like one of 10 different lineups basically.
But can you avoid that by leaving salary on the table? Like that's always been like something that I try to do when I'm playing these like super low owned cheap guys, because I do it particularly at captain because people like to play the like 200 guy at captain because then you can play all the studs in the flex. So then I'm like, well, just leave salary on the table if you do it.
It's still from what I've been able to tell, like it's not that it's getting duped, necessarily 100 times or anything,
right.
But you're not getting like unique or sub 5 lineups just by clicking in the 0.5% owned guy.
Right. You're giving up a lot of like odds of winning, and you're not gaining as much in terms of like avoiding duplicates as you should, as you would have like a few years ago. You would have been like, all right, I'm the only person with this lineup because I played this low probability play. And
like a perfect example was Span Ford last week. I had a really good lineup with him, and I mean it used I think 49.3, so like it left 700 on the table. Span Ford was 0.54% owned. My lineup was still duped 13 times.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. Basically, how good the field has gotten is what it comes down to. Is the field is just at least trying to avoid.
Like it's a good lineup. If it had won the tournament, it pays me like 30 grand or 40 grand or something. But like it's not. When Ferguson got hurt, and I saw this lineup that had started well, it was like Mixon, Nico, Stroud, Turpin. And so like I'm looking, I'm like, oh, I have a Turpin lineup. I had, it has Mixon a captain. It has a 0.5% Span Ford. Like, did I actually get a good, unique lineup? And I look, it's like, yeah, no, it's duped 13 times.
Right. All right, we're going to move on to defense kickers. I do want to, we got multiple questions again about Harris with Warren. Somebody else asked, in a 20 lineup set, how much would you have of Harris with Warren? I'm currently getting 80%. Is that okay? That was a question a while ago. And I would say, like, that's kind of a risk tolerance thing. Like, I probably wouldn't in a 20 lineup set. Like, there's more often than not, it's not going to work out. But if you just want to like take a big stand on it, I think that's fine. If that's how you want to play it.
Yeah, I'll say there's never like oh, that's too much of that. It's really just figuring that out for yourself as far as what you want to do.
Right.
I personally don't have nearly that much overlap between them. But if you are looking at this game and saying, not only do I like Najee because I think they run a lot, I think they really run a lot. I like Warren too. Then play them together a bunch if you want. It's
Yeah.
And then that's also aside from the whole diversity risk tolerance thing. Also where obviously the more times you do that, the more you're competing with yourself and the more money you're going to lose when it doesn't work out. That's all kind of just what you want to do.
Yep, exactly. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but yeah, totally fine to play Ward in the flex if you have Captain Harris. I think that's probably going to be somewhat unique. Yeah. Would you do Steelers defense in your Winston captain lineups? Yeah, no issue with that. I mean, like, I'm not like forcing it in there, but like I'm not doing anything to avoid that for sure. I think that's something that will probably go underutilized by the field, I would guess. So yeah, no issue with that.
I don't even know that it'll go underutilized, but
it might not.
They showed up as just in running optimal lineups. They showed up the Steelers defense as like the 6th most used flex when Jameis was at captain. In my Jameis captain lineup, 65% of them have the Steelers defense, which is aggressive, but not really difficult to explain away either.
Yeah. And that's a good transition to talking about defenses and kickers. As we have alluded to, like we're going to get some ownership on the Steelers defense in particular. So I'll just go over we can do this one kind of together. Steelers defense, 26% projected ownership overall. The Browns defense, in the flex, actually I should look at it separately. Browns defense, 16% in the flex. So again, 20 just under 26% for Steelers. Browns coming in 10% lower owned, and their 4,000 to Steelers are 5,400. In the captain, where I'm guessing they're also going to get, Steelers 3.5% captain ownership. Browns coming in at just under 2% captain ownership. How much are you getting to of each of these defenses?
I'm over the field on both. I have them both projected to be under-owned, and I am playing a lot of them, specifically the Steelers. I actually have them at captain 6% of the time, and then I have them at flex 62% of the time. So they're actually my highest owned flex right now. Again, like maybe that changes a little bit, but also I don't mind it because I don't like any of the mid-range plays on this slate that much. Like if I end up bumping Jerome Ford's projection a bit, that'll maybe cut into it a little bit since, Ford does give me a mid-range guy to play, but I don't really like Jalen Warren at 6,200. Even that, is more expensive than the Steelers. When you look at the guys around the Steelers, one, it's kind of just like a dead price range. They're 5,400. Boswell's 5K. I'm getting a lot of Boswell too. So it could just be kind of a price range thing. Like they're showing up. But then when you look at the cheaper guys, Hopkins is whatever, Ford is whatever, Freiermuth, Austin, Browns defense. Again, I'm over the field. Like there's not a lot in this range that looks good at all. Every player that I have projected higher than the Steelers defense right now costs at least $7,000. I have the Steelers projected higher than every other player on the slate. So they're going to show up a lot for me. And the Browns are, a good value too at 4K. So I'm getting a ton of Steelers defense. I'm getting a lot of Browns defense too.
That's it. So you have the Steelers defense projected better than Elijah Moore. Do we have it? Yeah, you're also projected better than Elijah Moore. I actually, this is the first time in my favorite captains segment where I do my 3 favorite captains. I listed the Steelers defense as my 3rd favorite captain. I think they're going to go probably under-owned. Maybe they don't actually end up under-owned, but obviously it's a great spot against Jameis Winston. The weather doesn't hurt. It could if the teams do decide to run a lot more. That obviously is not great for the defenses. So that's the one downside. But Steelers.
So that's true from an upside standpoint. It's not necessarily true in a showdown format though, because you don't need, like on a main slate, you need the team that gets a bunch of interceptions, scores a touchdown, whatever. On a showdown slate though, if both teams just run a lot and this ends up being a 9-6 game, or whatever, the defenses are probably
7 points or
optimal
whatever
because they scored 8 points.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point. This could be they could benefit from just a low scoring game, from a kind of a gross game. Yeah, so I also think the Browns defense looks pretty great. Sounds like you're not getting to 60 whatever percent of the Browns defense, but you are over the field at least.
Yeah, I have 26% at flex.
And Steven asked, how much of both defenses are you getting? Many both defense lineups?
I have, so in the lineups where I have the Steelers at flex, I have the Browns 15% of the time. So that's like 14 lineups. Where I have Steelers at captain, I have the Browns in 3 of 9. So I have like a total of 17 lineups, I think, if I just quickly counted right.
Okay. Are you getting to any Browns captain?
No.
All right. Kickers. We've got Dustin Hopkins coming in at 20% ownership, Chris Boswell 18% ownership. There could be some wind in this game. It sounds like it's not a huge concern there. That would obviously hurt the Kickers if it does get windy, but Roth is projecting it for 15 to 20 mile per hour, or maybe 10 to 15 with gusts. So I don't know how much you get into of the Kickers here.
I'm over on Boswell. I'm under on Hopkins. I don't have any sort of actual analysis here other than they're projected for similar ownership at similar prices, and I have a higher projection on Boswell, I guess, just because Steelers have a higher total. So whenever I have two players projected the same, or projected for similar ownership at similar prices and a gap in actual projection, I'm generally going to just end up over the field on one and under the field on the other. Collectively, I have similar exposure. So this is a spot where, like, if the ownership were to change, my exposures probably change pretty quickly too. The field right now, I have projected like 24% Boswell at flex, 22% Hopkins, and I have combined 44%. It's just that 35 of it's going to Boswell right now.
Okay. Jeff Klein wants to know, what is the guy on the right pointing to in the thumbnail? Jeff, that is your mom. I'm pointing to your mom. All right. No, I didn't change the thumbnail. I don't change my image for the different thumbnails. Adam, I think that we've covered everything on the slate. Do you have anything else to say about the slate?
I really hope Najee Harris doesn't suck.
I'm undecided on how much I'm going to get to, but yeah, I think I'm higher on like Jaylen Warren than you are. So maybe I hope that Jaylen Warren doesn't suck. All right. What else do you have coming up, Adam? Where can people find you? Where can they support you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS, the Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel, as you already mentioned, and I will be doing an NBA show in a few hours over there, talking NBA DraftKings NBA tournaments, 4-game slate tonight. So going to get my projections done after the show, and then be talking about how I'm attacking that.
Nice. I will be back tonight about 85 minutes prior to lock to break down this slate again. Probably we'll have inactives then, so maybe things will change a little bit based on inactives. Maybe I will change my thinking a little bit, but I'll be breaking it down again after inactives come out about 85 minutes prior to lock. I want to read Dan's quote here before. I want to just read it to myself before putting it up. I guess that is true. That is true. People don't make fun of Adam enough is the takeaway here. So everybody needs to start making fun of Adam more, so I can put it up on the screen. We can make fun of him together, is my takeaway. So there's my final thought on this one. Yeah, I will be back tonight. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to both of our channels. Do you have anything to add there, Adam?
Nope.
Okay, you look like you might have wanted to respond to that. And I was debating whether I was going to give you the opportunity to just close it out. Make sure you support both of our channels, Flannelverse, Endgame Syndicate. We really appreciate you. Give us some likes, subscribe, hit the notification buttons if you want to get notifications when we go live. We'll be doing shows later on. Thanks, everybody. Catch you later.